In Silicon Valley's gleaming tech corridor, a brilliant data scientist was about to face the fight of her life. What started as a routine holiday party took a shocking turn when she came face to face with corporate greed at its most vicious. Sarah Mitchell wasn't your typical quiet researcher. For 3 years, she had spent her life crafting a revolutionary AI algorithm in cramped offices and weekend coding sessions, known for her methodical brilliance and unwavering dedication to innovation. When she encountered her boss demanding she surrender her life's work, she had no idea she was walking into a battle that would expose Silicon Valley's darkest secrets. Sarah's refusal to sign away her intellectual property rights would lead to a legal war that would shake the entire tech industry. What began as a moment of recognition at a company celebration would become a crusade for justice. The technology world would never be the same after one woman's courage sparked a revolution that redefined who truly owns innovation. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The fluorescent lights in Sarah Mitchell's cramped office hummed their familiar tune as she stared at the dual monitors displaying the final test results. 3 years of 18-hour days, countless failed iterations, and enough coffee to float. A small boat had led to this moment. The numbers on her screen weren't just promising. They were revolutionary. Her algorithm had achieved something that seasoned AI researchers had declared impossible: true adaptive learning with a 97.3% accuracy rate in predictive modeling across diverse datasets. The neural network she'd painstakingly crafted didn't just process patterns. It evolved, learned, and anticipated with an almost intuitive understanding that bordered on the uncanny. Sarah's fingers trembled slightly as she ran the final validation sequence. The algorithm processed the new dataset, financial markets from the last decade, and within minutes, it had identified patterns that traditional models had missed entirely. More importantly, it predicted market movements with an accuracy that would make Wall Street analysts weep with envy. "Impossible," she whispered, though the evidence blazed across her monitors in undeniable clarity. The small Ohio town where she'd grown up seemed a universe away from this sterile Silicon Valley office park. Her father would have been proud, she thought, before pushing the familiar pang of loss aside. He died when she was 16, leaving behind a half-finished chess set he'd been carving by hand and a daughter who'd inherited his methodical patience and quiet determination. Sarah leaned back in her ergonomic chair, allowing herself a rare moment of pure satisfaction. This wasn't just a breakthrough. It was the kind of paradigm shift that could transform entire industries. Healthcare systems could predict patient outcomes with unprecedented accuracy. Supply chains could anticipate disruptions months in advance. The applications were limitless. Her phone buzzed with a text from her MIT roommate Jennifer. "Still burning the midnight oil? Remember, you have a life outside that lab." Sarah glanced at the clock. 11:47 p.m. The office building had emptied hours ago, leaving only the dedicated few, or the obsessed, depending on perspective. She'd always fallen into the latter category, much to her mother's gentle concern during their weekly calls. Before packing up, professional habit compelled her to document the breakthrough properly. She pulled up her employment contract to review the standard protocols for significant discoveries. The document loaded slowly on her aging laptop, and as she scrolled through the dense legal language, a particular clause caught her attention. Section 7.3. Intellectual property rights. All innovations, discoveries, improvements, inventions, and developments made by employee during the course of employment shall be deemed work for hire and remain the exclusive property of the company. Sarah read it again, her elation cooling, like coffee left too long on her desk. The clause was broader than she remembered, encompassing not just company projects but potentially any work done during her employment period. She'd developed significant portions of her algorithm on her own time, using her personal equipment, driven by her own curiosity rather than any company directive. Her stomach tightened as she continued reading. The contract's language was deliberately vague, crafted by lawyers who understood that ambiguity favored the house. Questions she'd never considered began multiplying. Who truly owned the breakthrough that could be worth millions? Did the company have a legitimate claim simply because she'd used their resources for some of the testing? The breakthrough that had felt like vindication moments earlier now carried the weight of potential legal entanglement. Sarah saved her work to multiple secure locations, a habit her father had instilled when he taught her programming basics on an ancient desktop computer. Always keep copies, sweetheart. Important things have a way of disappearing. Her personal phone rang, cutting through the office silence. Her mother's contact photo, Linda Mitchell smiling in her nurse's scrubs, appeared on the screen. Sarah? Honey, it's late. Are you still at the office? Hi, Mom. Yeah, I had a breakthrough tonight. The project I've been working on. Linda's voice carried 3 decades of single motherhood wisdom. That's wonderful, sweetheart. But you sound troubled. Sarah found herself explaining the contract clause, the questions about ownership, the uncertainty that had transformed triumph into anxiety. Her mother listened without interruption, a skill she'd developed during years of working with anxious patients. Your father faced something similar once, Linda said finally. He developed a new inventory system for the manufacturing plant where he worked. Management tried to claim ownership, said it belonged to the company since he'd thought of it, during work hours. Sarah had never heard this story. What did he do? He stood up for himself, documented everything, proved he'd developed it independently. It wasn't easy. Your father hated confrontation, but he knew right from wrong. Linda's voice softened. He always said that good work speaks for itself, but sometimes you have to be your own voice. After ending the call, Sarah sat in the quiet office, her mother's words echoing in the humming fluorescent silence. The algorithm still blazed across her monitors, lines of elegant code representing years of dedicated effort. It was hers in every way that mattered, conceived, developed, and refined through her intellect and persistence. Her email chimed with a message from Marcus Blackwell, VP of Engineering and her direct supervisor. The timestamp showed he'd sent it 20 minutes ago. Sarah, heard through the grapevine you might have something exciting to share. Let's schedule a meeting first thing Monday to discuss your recent progress. I'm particularly interested in any developments that might have commercial potential. See you bright and early. Marcus. The message carried an undertone that made Sarah's chest tighten. Marcus had a reputation for taking credit where credit wasn't necessarily due, though he maintained enough plausible deniability to avoid direct confrontation. His use of commercial potential felt deliberate, loaded with implications she wasn't ready to face. As she gathered her belongings, footsteps echoed in the hallway. Rebecca Chen appeared in her doorway, designer heels clicking against the polished floor despite the late hour. Sarah! I thought I was the only crazy person still here. Rebecca's smile was warm, but her eyes quickly scanned the monitors displaying Sarah's work. Working on anything interesting? Rebecca had been a good friend during their first year at the company, but their relationship had grown complicated as they'd advanced in different directions. Rebecca had always been more politically astute, more willing to navigate office dynamics in ways that Sarah found exhausting. Just finishing up some testing, Sarah replied carefully, minimizing her screens. Well, don't work too hard. You know what they say about all work and no play. Rebecca's laugh sounded forced. Actually, I heard Marcus is pretty excited about some new development in your department. Big things coming? The question felt like fishing, though Sarah couldn't determine the motive. Nothing concrete yet, still in early stages. Of course. Well, see you Monday. And Sarah? Rebecca paused at the threshold. Just remember, sometimes the biggest discoveries come with the biggest challenges. It's important to be strategic about how you handle them. After Rebecca disappeared down the hallway, Sarah locked her computer and headed for the elevator. The building's lobby was tomb quiet, security guard nodding sleepily from his desk. Outside, Silicon Valley's night air carried the familiar blend of ambition and exhaustion that permeated every corner of the tech world. During the drive to her modest apartment, Sarah's mind churned with questions that had no easy answers. Her breakthrough could change everything, not just for predictive analytics, but for her career, her future, her life. But it could also destroy everything if she mishandled the politics surrounding it. As she pulled into her parking space, one thought crystallized above the rest. Monday's meeting with Marcus would determine whether her greatest professional achievement became her greatest professional nightmare. The algorithm was hers, born from her mind and nurtured by her dedication. The question was whether she'd have the strength to fight for it when the time came. The fluorescent lights in her office would be dark until Monday morning, but the code would wait, patient as mathematics, for whatever battle lay ahead. Monday morning arrived with Silicon Valley's typical overcast sky, the marine layer casting everything in muted gray tones that matched Sarah's mood. She'd spent the weekend researching intellectual property law, her small apartment cluttered with printed articles and highlighted legal documents. The more she learned, the more complex her situation appeared. Sarah arrived at the office 40 minutes early, hoping to review her presentation materials before Marcus's meeting. The elevator ride to the 14th floor felt longer than usual, each floor ding marking another step toward an encounter she simultaneously anticipated and dreaded. Marcus Blackwell's corner office was a monument to corporate success. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the valley, leather furniture that cost more than Sarah's annual car payments, and walls decorated with awards that, upon closer inspection, seemed to involve projects where his actual contribution remained vague. "Sarah, come in, come in." Marcus's voice carried the practiced enthusiasm of someone who'd perfected the art of seeming genuine. He gestured toward the leather chairs facing his massive mahogany desk. "Coffee? I had my assistant get that Ethiopian blend you mentioned. Liking." The details surprised her. Marcus rarely remembered personal preferences unless they served his purposes. Sarah accepted the coffee, noting how he positioned himself behind his desk, a subtle power play she'd never noticed before her. Weekend crash course in office politics. "So," Marcus leaned back in his executive chair, his smile widening. "I understand you've had quite the breakthrough with your little AI project." Little AI project. The dismissive phrasing sent a warning signal through Sarah's nervous system. 3 years of painstaking work, reduced to a casual afterthought. "The algorithm has exceeded all performance expectations," Sarah replied carefully. "The predictive accuracy rates are unprecedented in the field." "Fantastic. That's exactly what I was hoping to hear." Marcus opened a manila folder on his desk. "In fact, I've been so excited about the potential that I've already had our legal team prepare some paperwork to streamline the commercialization process." He slid several documents across the polished wood surface. Sarah recognized them immediately: patent, assignment forms, intellectual property transfer agreements, licensing contracts, all bearing her name as the assigner and the company as the assignee. "I don't understand," Sarah said, though she understood perfectly. "These appear to be ownership transfer documents." Marcus's expression shifted subtly, the warmth dimming behind his eyes. "Well, yes. Standard procedure for any significant innovation developed on company time, using company resources. Surely you understand that your breakthrough belongs to the organization that made it possible." Sarah's coffee suddenly tasted bitter. "I developed significant portions of this algorithm on my own time, using my personal equipment. The core mathematical framework was conceived entirely outside of work hours." Sarah. Marcus's tone carried the condescending patience of someone explaining simple concepts to a child. "You're being naive about how the business world operates. The employment contract you signed grants the company ownership of all intellectual property developed during your tenure here. It doesn't matter where you had your little eureka moment." The phrase "little eureka moment" landed like a slap. Sarah set down her coffee cup with deliberate care, buying herself time to process the casual dismissal of her life's work. "I'd like to have my own legal counsel review these documents before signing anything," she said. Marcus's friendly facade cracked further. "Legal counsel? Sarah, we're talking about standard employment agreements here. This isn't some hostile takeover. We're recognizing your excellent contribution to the company's success. By taking ownership of my work? By properly attributing company innovations to the company." Marcus leaned forward, his voice taking on an edge. "Let me be frank with you. I've already presented preliminary findings from your algorithm to the executive committee. David Sterling himself is personally interested in fast-tracking this to market." Sarah felt the blood drain from her face. "You presented my work without my knowledge?" "I presented the company's work. Work that you've done as a company employee, using company resources, under company direction." Marcus's mask was fully off now, revealing the calculating ambition beneath. David has asked me to oversee the commercialization process personally. This could be my ticket to the C-suite, Sarah, and I'm not going to let misplaced sentimentality derail that opportunity. The admission hung in the air between them like a toxic cloud. Marcus had just revealed that her breakthrough was nothing more than a stepping stone for his own advancement, and he felt confident enough in his position to say so openly. "What if I refuse to sign?" Sarah asked quietly. Marcus's smile returned, but it was cold now, predatory. "Well, that would be unfortunate. You see, I've been reviewing your performance over the past year, and I've noticed some concerning patterns. Missed deadlines, isolated work habits, difficulty collaborating with team members. It would be a shame if those issues became more prominent in your official evaluations." The threat was delivered with the same cheerful tone he'd used to offer coffee. Sarah realized she was seeing Marcus's true nature for the first time. Not the charismatic leader he portrayed in meetings, but the manipulative operator who'd climbed the corporate ladder by stepping on others. "You're saying that if I don't sign over my intellectual property, you'll manufacture negative performance reviews?" "I'm saying that employee cooperation and team spirit are important factors in career advancement, or career stagnation." Marcus shuffled the papers on his desk. "Look, Sarah, I like you. You're brilliant, dedicated, hardworking, but you're also naive about how this industry operates. Intellectual property belongs to the companies that fund it, develop it, and bring it to market. Your algorithm is worthless, sitting in your computer. It needs our infrastructure, our connections, our business development capabilities to become valuable." Sarah stood slowly, her mind racing through the implications of what she'd just heard. "And my compensation for this contribution? You'll continue receiving your current salary, plus a standard innovation bonus of $5,000, quite generous for a staff-level employee. $5,000 for an algorithm that could be worth tens of millions. The insult was breathtaking in its audacity. "I need time to consider this," Sarah said. Marcus's expression hardened completely. "Time is a luxury we don't have. David wants a demonstration for potential investors next week. I need those signatures by Friday, Sarah. That gives you 4 days to make the right decision." "And if I don't? Then we'll need to have a very different conversation about your future with this company." Marcus stood as well, his presence looming across the desk. "I've invested considerable political capital in presenting your work as a breakthrough innovation. If you make me look foolish in front of the executive team, I promise you that the consequences will be significant." Sarah gathered her composure, drawing on the quiet strength her mother had modeled throughout her childhood. "I understand the timeline. I'll give you my decision by Friday." "Excellent. I knew you'd see reason." Marcus's fake warmth returned as he walked her to the door. "And Sarah, I'd suggest keeping this conversation confidential. Rumors and speculation can be damaging to company morale." Walking back to her office, Sarah felt like she was moving through water. The hallways that had felt familiar and comfortable for 3 years now seemed alien, full of hidden dangers and unseen threats. Colleagues she passed offered their usual greetings, but she wondered how many would side with her if the situation became public. At her desk, Sarah stared at her computer screen without seeing it. The algorithm's code seemed to mock her from behind the login screen. Her greatest achievement transformed into the weapon that could destroy her career. She thought about her father's story, about standing up for principles even when it was difficult. But her father had worked in manufacturing, not Silicon Valley. He hadn't faced executives with unlimited legal resources and the ruthless pragmatism that characterized the tech industry. The stakes here were measured in millions of dollars and corporate advancement, not just personal pride. Sarah opened her desk drawer and pulled out her phone. She scrolled through her contacts until she found Jake Morrison's number. Her finger hovered over the call button for a long moment before she finally pressed it. "Jake Morrison, patent law." "Jake? It's Sarah Mitchell. I think I need a lawyer." The silence on the other end stretched for several seconds before Jake's voice returned, serious and focused. "What's happened?" "My boss just told me that my 3 years of work belongs to the company. And if I don't sign it over by Friday, he'll destroy my career. Don't sign anything. Don't say anything more to anyone at your company. Can you meet me for lunch today? Yes. Good. And Sarah, whatever you're dealing with, you're not alone anymore. After hanging up, Sarah sat in her office chair, staring out at the Silicon Valley landscape that had once represented opportunity and innovation. Now it felt like enemy territory, a battlefield where brilliant minds were just another resource, to be exploited by those clever enough to manipulate the system. The fluorescent lights hummed their familiar tune, but everything else had changed. By Friday, she would either be the owner of her own breakthrough or just another casualty of corporate ambition. The only question was whether she had the strength to fight back against forces far more powerful and ruthless than anything she'd ever faced in small-town Ohio. The tech district's lunch crowd moved with Silicon Valley's characteristic urgency. Startup. Founders pitching venture capitalists, engineers debugging code over salads, executives closing deals between bites of artisanal sandwiches. Sarah found Jake Morrison waiting at their agreed-upon coffee shop, a deliberately anonymous chain location far from her office building. Jake looked exactly as she remembered from their MIT days. Tall, broad-shouldered, with prematurely gray, temples that somehow made him appear more distinguished rather than older. His dark suit was well-tailored but not flashy, projecting competence without ostentation. When he spotted Sarah approaching, his expression shifted from professional alertness to genuine concern. "You look like you haven't slept," he said, standing, to embrace her. 43 minutes, Sarah replied, checking her fitness tracker. "I've been researching employment law since 3 a.m. Jake's eyebrows rose. "And what did your research tell you?" "That I'm probably screwed." Sarah slumped into the chair across from him. "The contract language is broad enough to drive a truck through. All innovations, discoveries, improvements, inventions, and developments made by employee during the course of employment. How do you fight something that vague?" "You fight it by proving the work was genuinely independent," Jake said, pulling out a legal pad. "Tell me everything from the beginning. How did you first conceive the algorithm?" Sarah found herself recounting the last 3 years in detail. The initial inspiration during a weekend hiking trip in Big Sur. The mathematical breakthrough she'd achieved while reviewing academic papers at home. The hundreds of hours of coding done on her personal laptop. Jake took notes in the precise handwriting she remembered from their college study sessions. "This is actually encouraging," Jake said when she finished. "You have a strong case for independent development. The key is documentation, emails time-stamped, outside work hours, personal equipment usage, the fact that your core innovation predates any company assignment." "But Marcus said the contract covers everything during my employment period, regardless of when or where the work was done." Jake shook his head. "California employment law is more employee-friendly than most states. Courts here have ruled repeatedly that overly broad intellectual property clauses are unenforceable, especially when the innovation is unrelated to the employee's assigned duties and developed using personal resources." For the first time since Monday morning's meeting, Sarah felt a spark of hope. "So, I can fight this?" "You can absolutely fight this. The question is whether you want to." Jake's expression grew serious. "Corporate litigation is expensive, time-consuming, and emotionally draining. Even when you win, you often lose in other ways. Your boss sounds like someone who'll make your life miserable during the process." Sarah thought about Marcus's threats, the casual way he'd discussed destroying her career. "He's already making my life miserable. At least this way I'd be fighting back." "Then let's talk strategy." Jake flipped to a fresh page. "First, we need to secure and document all evidence of your independent development. Personal emails, early code versions, any witnesses who can testify to your work outside the office. Second, we file for provisional patent protection under your name before the company can claim ownership. Third, we prepare for the fact that this will likely get ugly before it gets better." "How ugly?" Jake's pause was answer enough. Companies with deep pockets tend to view legal challenges as wars of attrition. They'll try to outspend you, outlast you, and make the process so painful that you'll settle for pennies on the dollar. Sarah's phone buzzed with a text message. "Marcus, hope you're having a productive lunch. Remember, confidentiality is key during sensitive negotiations." She showed Jake the message. His expression darkened. He's monitoring your activities? Apparently. Sarah felt a chill that had nothing to do with the air conditioning. How did he even know I was at lunch? Security badges track employee movements, or he could have someone watching. Jake made another note. This escalates things. We need to move faster than I initially thought. They spent the next hour developing a preliminary strategy. Jake would begin drafting patent applications while Sarah gathered evidence of her independent work. They agreed to meet again Wednesday evening to review progress and finalize their approach. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel, it means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Walking back to her office, Sarah felt simultaneously empowered and terrified. She had an ally now, someone who understood the legal landscape and believed in her case. But she also had a clearer picture of the battle ahead. A David versus Goliath struggle where Goliath had unlimited resources and no apparent scruples about using them. Her first stop was Aiyana Rodriguez's office. Sarah had interacted with the HR director primarily during annual reviews and company policy updates, but she'd always sensed that Aiyana was different from the typical corporate functionary. There was something in her manner, a wariness perhaps, or a carefully concealed disappointment with the system she served. Aiyana's office was notably modest compared to the executive suite, decorated with family photos and a law degree from UC Berkeley that hinted at a more complex background than her current role suggested. Sarah, come in. What can I do for you? I need to understand something about intellectual property policies, Sarah began carefully. Hypothetically, if an employee develops something significant partially on their own time, what would be the proper procedure for determining ownership? Aiyana's expression sharpened. Hypothetically? For now, yes. Aiyana closed her office door before responding. Hypothetically, the company would be required to demonstrate that the innovation was developed using company resources, during company time, or as part of assigned duties. The burden of proof would be on the company, not the employee. And, if the company couldn't meet that burden, then the employee would retain ownership rights, assuming they could document their independent development process. Aiyana studied Sarah's face. This wouldn't happen to relate to recent discussions between you and Marcus Blackwell, would it? Sarah's surprise must have shown clearly. Aiyana continued. I've been with this company for 6 years, and I've seen Marcus's approach to talent management. Let's just say that his definition of company property tends to be rather expansive. Have there been other cases like this? Aiyana glanced at her computer screen, then back at Sarah. Officially, no. Unofficially, Marcus has a pattern of claiming credit for subordinates' work. Usually people don't fight it because the stakes are lower, or they don't understand their rights. But this time, the stakes aren't lower. No, Aiyana said quietly. I suspect they're not. Sarah made a decision that surprised her with its boldness. I developed a breakthrough AI algorithm over the past 3 years, primarily on my own time using my own equipment. Marcus wants me to sign over all rights to the company, and he's threatened my job if I refuse. Aiyana was quiet for a long moment. That puts me in a difficult position. My job is to protect the company's interests. I understand. I'm just asking you to make sure the company's interests are properly defined. If Marcus is overreaching, that creates liability for the organization. You're right about that. Aiyana opened a file cabinet and pulled out a folder. I think you should know that Marcus submitted a request last week to review your personnel file for performance concerns. I found that timing interesting. The implication was clear. Marcus had begun building a case against her even before their confrontational meeting, preparing to manufacture justification for any punitive actions he might take. What would you advise, professionally speaking? Aiyana chose her words carefully. Professionally, I'd advise any employee to document everything, understand their rights, and seek appropriate legal counsel when necessary. I'd also advise them to be aware that retaliation against employees who assert legitimate legal rights is itself a violation of company policy. Walking back to her desk, Sarah felt like she was seeing her workplace with new eyes. The casual conversations, the project updates, the performance reviews, all of it was part of a complex political ecosystem where information was power and survival often depended on understanding the unwritten rules. Her phone buzzed with a call from her mother. Hi, sweetheart. I've been thinking about our conversation Friday night. about your father's situation. Hi, Mom. Actually, that story has become very relevant. Sarah found herself explaining the confrontation with Marcus, the legal complexities, her meeting with Jake. Linda listened without interruption, occasionally making the small sounds that indicated she was processing difficult information. It sounds like you're facing a much bigger version of what your father dealt with, Linda said finally. But you have advantages he didn't have. You're better educated, you understand the stakes, and you have professional help. I'm also scared, Sarah admitted. This could destroy my career if I handle it wrong. Your father was scared too, but he said something I've never forgotten. Sometimes you have to risk everything you have to protect who you are. Your work is part of who you are, Sarah. Don't let them take that away from you. After ending the call, Sarah sat at her desk, staring at her computer screen. The algorithm's code seemed to pulse with possibility, not just technological, but personal. This wasn't just about intellectual property or financial compensation. It was about whether she would allow herself to be defined by others' greed and ambition, or whether she would stand up for the principles her parents had instilled. Her email chimed with a message from Rebecca Chen. Coffee later? Need to discuss something important. Sarah stared at the message, wondering if Rebecca's interest was friendly concern or corporate intelligence gathering. In her old worldview, she would have assumed the former. In her new reality, she couldn't afford such assumptions. She typed back, "Sure. 4 p.m. at the lobby cafe?" Whatever Rebecca wanted to discuss, Sarah would be ready. She was learning, finally, that in Silicon Valley's corporate landscape, everyone was a potential ally or enemy until they proved otherwise. The naive employee who'd walked into Marcus's office Monday morning was gone, replaced by someone who understood that survival required strategy, allies, and the willingness to fight for what belonged to her. The fluorescent lights hummed their familiar tune, but Sarah was no longer the same person who'd worked beneath them. The battle for her algorithm and her future was just beginning. Wednesday evening found Sarah in her apartment, surrounded by 3 years' worth of documentation spread across her living room floor like pieces of a complex puzzle. Emails, code repositories, personal notes, even photos of whiteboards from her home office. Every piece of evidence that could establish her independent development of the algorithm. Jake arrived with Chinese takeout and a briefcase full of legal documents. He surveyed the organized chaos with professional appreciation. "This is impressive," he said, kneeling beside a chronologically arranged stack of time-stamped emails. "You've documented everything. My dad taught me to keep records. I just never thought I'd need them for legal warfare." Sarah handed him a timeline she'd created. The core mathematical framework came to me during a hiking trip in February 2022. I emailed myself the initial equations from the trailhead parking lot. Jake examined the email timestamp, 2:17 a.m., sent from her personal Gmail account to her personal cloud storage. "This is exactly what we need. Courts love this kind of contemporaneous documentation." They worked through the evening, building a comprehensive case file. Sarah's personal laptop contained dozens of early algorithm iterations, all created outside business hours using her own equipment. Her personal cloud storage held research notes, academic papers she'd studied at home, and mathematical proofs she'd developed during weekend sessions. "There's something else," Sarah said, pulling up her work calendar. "Marcus assigned me to a completely different project during the period when I made the major breakthroughs. I was supposed to be working on user interface optimization for the existing analytics platform." Jake looked up from his notes. "So you can prove that the algorithm development wasn't part of your assigned duties?" "Not only that, but Marcus actively discouraged me from pursuing AI research. He said it was outside our departmental focus." Sarah found the email thread. "Look at this." The exchange was damning. Marcus had explicitly told Sarah to focus on practical improvements to existing systems rather than chasing theoretical advances that may never have commercial application. He'd redirected her to mundane optimization tasks, while she pursued her revolutionary algorithm as an independent passion project. "This is devastating to their case," Jake said. "They can't claim ownership of work they actively discouraged." Sarah's phone rang. Rebecca Chen's name appeared on the screen. "I should take this," Sarah said. "She wanted to meet earlier, but I had to cancel." "Rebecca? Hi." "Sarah, I'm worried about you. There are rumors circulating, and I think you need to know what's being said. Sarah put the call on speaker with Jake's approval. What kind of rumors? Marcus has been having closed-door meetings with HR and the legal department. People are saying there's some kind of intellectual property dispute involving your AI work. Rebecca's voice carried genuine concern, but also something else, perhaps fear. Sarah, I need to tell you something. Marcus approached me yesterday. He asked detailed questions about your work habits, when you arrive and leave, whether you ever discussed your algorithm project with me. Sarah and Jake exchanged glances. What did you tell him? The truth, that you always seem to be working on something mysterious after hours, but you never shared details. But Sarah, the way he was asking, it felt like he was building a case against you. Did he say anything else? Rebecca hesitated. He mentioned that intellectual property theft is a serious offense that could affect someone's entire career in the industry. He said it would be unfortunate if a brilliant person like you made a mistake that followed them forever. The threat was unmistakable, even delivered secondhand. Marcus was laying groundwork to not just claim Sarah's algorithm, but to destroy her professional reputation if she fought back. Rebecca, I need to ask you something directly. Whose side are you on in this? The silence stretched uncomfortably before Rebecca answered. I'm on your side, Sarah. But I'm also terrified. I can't afford to make enemies of senior management. I have student loans, family obligations. I'm not in a position to be a martyr. It was an honest answer, even if it wasn't the one Sarah had hoped for. I understand. After ending the call, Jake made notes about Marcus's intimidation tactics. He's making mistakes, Jake observed. Threatening witnesses, building cases based on false premises, attempting to intimidate employees who might testify. These actions actually strengthen your position. How? Because they demonstrate consciousness of guilt. If the company genuinely owned your algorithm, they wouldn't need to threaten people or manufacture evidence. They'd simply assert their legal rights. Thursday morning brought an unexpected development. Aiyana Rodriguez appeared at Sarah's cubicle with a manila folder and a carefully neutral expression. Sarah, could I see you in my office? There are some personnel matters we need to discuss. In her office, Aiyana closed the door and opened the folder. I've been conducting an internal audit of intellectual property documentation procedures, and I've discovered some irregularities. She spread several documents across her desk. Sarah recognized them as project assignment sheets, performance reviews, and departmental memos, all bearing Marcus's signature. These are interesting, Aiyana continued. According to these documents, you were assigned to AI algorithm development as your primary responsibility starting in January 2022. Your performance reviews consistently praise your innovation and independent thinking. And this memo from Marcus to David Sterling describes the algorithm as the result of my department's cutting-edge research initiative. Sarah studied the documents with growing amazement. But this isn't. I was never assigned to AI development. Marcus actively discouraged it. That's what I suspected. The dates on these documents are also suspicious. They were all created, or significantly modified within the past week. Aiyana's expression was carefully professional, but her meaning was clear. Document modification after the fact is a serious ethical violation. Are you saying Marcus falsified records? I'm saying that someone altered official company documents to support a particular narrative, that someone would face significant disciplinary action if such behavior were proven. Aiyana closed the folder. I thought you should be aware of these irregularities as you navigate your current situation. It would be unfortunate if decisions were made based on inaccurate documentation. Walking back to her desk, Sarah felt a mixture of vindication and alarm. Aiyana had essentially handed her proof that Marcus was manufacturing evidence, but it also demonstrated how far he was willing to go to claim her work. She was no longer dealing with simple corporate greed, but with someone willing to commit fraud to advance his career. Her computer chimed with a calendar reminder. Meeting with David Sterling, 2 p.m., conference room A. Sarah stared at the appointment she'd never scheduled. Her hands began to shake as she realized the implications. Marcus had arranged a meeting with the CEO without her knowledge. likely to present their algorithm and force her hand. She immediately called Jake, who answered on the first ring. "They've called a meeting with the CEO for this afternoon," she said without preamble. "I think Marcus is going to present my algorithm as his own and try to get executive approval for commercialization." "Don't go to that meeting alone," Jake said immediately. "As your legal counsel, I have the right to be present for any discussions involving intellectual property disputes. Can you get here in time?" "I'm all ready. In my car." At 1:55 p.m., Sarah walked into conference room A with Jake beside her. The scene inside was exactly what she'd feared. Marcus stood at the head of the polished conference table with her algorithm displayed on the wall-mounted screens, presenting to David Sterling and 3 other executives she recognized as department heads. Marcus stopped mid-sentence when he saw Jake. "Sarah, this is an internal company meeting. Your friend isn't authorized to be here." "Actually," Jake said, handing Marcus a business card, "I'm Ms. Mitchell's legal counsel, and I'm here to address intellectual property concerns related to the material being presented." David Sterling, a silver-haired man in his 60s with the bearing of someone accustomed to absolute authority, studied Jake with sharp eyes. "Legal counsel? That seems rather dramatic for an employee presentation." "It becomes necessary when there are disputes over ownership of intellectual property," Jake replied calmly. "The algorithm being presented was developed by Ms. Mitchell independently, outside of work hours, using her personal equipment. Any attempt to claim company ownership would be legally problematic." Marcus's face flushed red. "This is ridiculous. Sarah is a company employee who developed this using company resources under my supervision." "That's demonstrably false," Jake said, opening his briefcase. "We have extensive documentation proving independent development, including time-stamped emails, personal equipment usage logs, and evidence that Mr. Blackwell actually discouraged this research." The room fell silent. David Sterling looked from Marcus to Sarah to Jake, his expression unreadable. "It seems we have a situation that requires resolution," Sterling said finally. "Marcus, postpone this presentation until our legal department can review the ownership questions. Sarah, I expect you to cooperate fully with that review." As they left the conference room, Marcus grabbed Sarah's arm in the hallway. "You have no idea what you've just done," he hissed. "I will destroy you for this." Jake stepped between them. "Mr. Blackwell, I'd advise against making threats in front of witnesses. It won't help your position." Marcus stormed away, leaving Sarah and Jake standing in the hallway. Other employees hurried past, averting their eyes from the obvious confrontation. "What happens now?" Sarah asked. "Now the real battle begins," Jake replied. "But you've just demonstrated that you won't be intimidated, and that changes the entire dynamic." Marcus overplayed his hand, and Sterling noticed. That evening, Sarah sat in her apartment reviewing the day's events. She'd gone from passive victim to active fighter in the span of a few hours. The cost would be significant. Her comfortable anonymity was gone. Her workplace relationships were forever altered, and Marcus would undoubtedly escalate his campaign against her. But for the first time since Monday morning's meeting, she felt like herself again. The woman who'd earned her PhD at MIT, who'd solved mathematical problems that had stymied seasoned researchers, who'd inherited her father's quiet determination and her mother's practical wisdom. Her phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. "People are talking. Be careful. A friend." The message sent a chill through her, but also a spark of defiance. Let them talk. Let Marcus make his threats, and David Sterling make his calculations. She had the truth, documented evidence, and allies who believed in justice over corporate politics. The algorithm that had started as a personal passion project had become the center of a battle that would define not just her career, but her character. And for the first time in her adult life, Sarah Mitchell was ready to fight. Friday morning arrived gray and drizzling, Silicon Valley's autumn weather matching the somber mood that had settled over Sarah's department. Word of Thursday's confrontation had spread through the office with the speed and distortion typical of corporate gossip. Some colleagues avoided eye contact, others offered subtle nods of support, and a few seemed genuinely confused about what was happening. Sarah arrived early, hoping to complete her regular work before the day's inevitable drama unfolded. She found Elena Rodriguez waiting by her cubicle with 2 cups of coffee and an expression that mixed concern with determination. "We need to talk," Elena said simply. In her office, Elena placed a thick folder on her desk. "I spent most of yesterday evening and this morning documenting everything I could find related to your situation. Performance reviews, project assignments, email trails, budget allocations, anything that might be relevant." Sarah opened the folder and began scanning the documents. What she found was a systematic pattern of manipulation spanning several months. Marcus had retroactively edited project descriptions, modified performance metrics, and even altered budget codes to suggest that Sarah's algorithm development had been funded and directed by the company. "This is fraud," Sarah said, her voice barely above a whisper. "It's certainly ethical misconduct, possibly rising to the level of criminal fraud, depending on how the district attorney's office views corporate document manipulation." Elena's legal background was evident in her precise language. "But there's something else you need to know." She pulled out another document, an email thread between Marcus and David Sterling from 3 weeks earlier, before Sarah had even completed her breakthrough testing. "Marcus has been shopping your preliminary results to investors," Elena said. "He's scheduled presentations with 3 major venture capital firms for next week, claiming the algorithm as his innovation." Sarah read the emails with growing disbelief. Marcus had not only planned to steal her work, but had been actively marketing it to outside investors while she was still perfecting the code. The level of premeditation was staggering. "How did you get these emails?" Elena's smile was grim. "Marcus requested access to your development files through official channels. That gave me legitimate grounds to review all related communications for data security purposes. What I found was illuminating." "Are you willing to testify about this if it goes to court?" Elena was quiet for a long moment. "Sarah, I've been in HR for 15 years, and I've seen too many brilliant people crushed by systems that were supposed to protect them. Yes, I'll testify. But you need to understand that this decision will probably end my career at this company. I can't ask you to sacrifice your job for me." "You're not asking, I'm choosing." Elena's voice carried a resolve that surprised Sarah with its strength. "There comes a point where you have to decide whether you're part of the problem or part of the solution. I've been part of the problem for too long." Jake arrived at lunchtime with updates from his legal research. They met at a small restaurant several miles from the office, taking a corner booth where they could speak privately. "I've been reviewing similar cases from the past 5 years, Jake said, opening his laptop. "California courts have consistently sided with employees when there's clear evidence of independent development, especially in cases where the employer actively discouraged the innovation." He showed Sarah several case summaries. Tech companies had attempted to claim ownership of everything from mobile apps to biotechnology patents, but courts had repeatedly ruled that overly broad employment contracts couldn't override fundamental intellectual property rights. "The precedents are strongly in your favor," Jake continued. "But there's a complication. Sterling Industries has retained Harrison, Webb and Associates as outside counsel. They're the most aggressive IP litigation firm in Silicon Valley." Sarah felt her stomach tighten. "What does that mean?" "It means they're not planning to settle quietly. They're preparing for a full-scale legal war, and they have the resources to make it extremely expensive and time-consuming for us." Jake's phone buzzed with a text message. He read it, his expression darkening. "That was my contact at the patent office. Sterling Industries filed a provisional patent application for your algorithm this morning, claiming corporate ownership." "Can they do that?" "They can file anything they want. Whether it will stand up to challenge is another matter." Jake made notes on his legal pad. "But it does escalate the timeline. We need to file our own application immediately to establish competing claims." They spent the afternoon preparing Sarah's individual patent application. The process was complex, requiring detailed technical descriptions, prior art analysis, and claims of novelty that could withstand professional scrutiny. Sarah found herself describing her own breakthrough in language so formal and technical that it barely resembled the intuitive leap that had occurred during her hiking trip 18 months earlier. "This feels surreal," she said as they reviewed the final draft. "I'm having to prove I invented my own algorithm." Unfortunately, that's exactly what the legal system requires, Jake replied. But your documentation is solid. We have time-stamped evidence of conception, development, and reduction to practice, all occurring outside of your employment duties. At 4 p.m., Sarah returned. The Algorithm Wars. Monday evening's holiday party transformed Sterling Industries' main conference center into a glittering showcase of corporate success. Crystal chandeliers cast warm light over tables laden with catered delicacies, while a jazz quartet provided sophisticated background music for the networking conversations that hummed throughout the space. Employees had traded their casual tech attire for cocktail wear, creating an atmosphere of celebration that felt surreal, given the tensions Sarah knew were simmering beneath the surface. Sarah arrived fashionably late, wearing a navy blue dress her mother had helped her select during a weekend shopping trip months earlier. She'd chosen it for its professional elegance, never imagining she'd be wearing it to what might become a battlefield. Jake had positioned himself near the bar, nursing a club soda and maintaining visual contact with her throughout the room. The evening began predictably enough. David Sterling delivered his annual address celebrating the company's achievements, highlighting revenue growth, successful product launches, and the innovative spirit that drove their continued success. Departmental awards were presented with the usual ceremony, accompanied by polite applause and brief acceptance speeches. "And now," Sterling announced, his voice carrying the practiced enthusiasm of a seasoned executive, "we come to our highest individual honor, the Employee of the Year Award." Sarah felt her stomach tighten as she realized what was about to happen. She'd known about the award for weeks, but in the chaos of recent events, she'd forgotten that it would be presented at the holiday party. The irony was almost too perfect, receiving recognition for her contributions to the company on the same evening when those contributions were at the center of a legal battle. This year's recipient has demonstrated exceptional innovation, dedication, and technical excellence, Sterling continued. Her breakthrough research in artificial intelligence represents the kind of paradigm-shifting work that defines our company's mission. The applause began before Sarah's name was even announced. Colleagues turned toward her with genuine smiles, unaware of the corporate drama playing out behind the scenes. Rebecca Chen clapped enthusiastically from across the room, her expression unreadable. Marcus Blackwell stood near the presentation stage, his face arranged in a mask of professional congratulations that didn't quite hide the predatory anticipation in his eyes. "Please join me in congratulating Sarah Mitchell." The walk to the stage felt endless, each step accompanied by applause that seemed to grow louder and more uncomfortable. Sarah accepted the Crystal Award, an elegant piece engraved with her name and the company logo, and approached the microphone with her prepared remarks. "Thank you for this incredible honor," she began, her voice steady despite the adrenaline coursing through her system. "Innovation doesn't happen in isolation. It requires support, encouragement, and the freedom to pursue ideas that might seem impossible." She caught Jake's eye in the crowd, drawing strength from his presence. "The algorithm that has generated so much excitement represents 3 years of dedicated research, countless late nights, and the kind of intellectual curiosity that makes working in technology so rewarding." The applause was warm and genuine. For a moment, Sarah allowed herself to enjoy the recognition, to feel proud of what she'd accomplished regardless of the battles ahead. Then Marcus stepped forward. "If I could add a few words," he said, his voice carrying across the room with practiced authority. The crowd turned toward him expectantly, assuming he was about to offer additional praise for Sarah's achievement. "Sarah's work exemplifies the collaborative spirit that makes our engineering department so successful," Marcus began, moving to stand beside her at the microphone. "But I think it's important to recognize that breakthrough innovations like Sarah's algorithm are truly team efforts, built on company resources, guided by departmental strategy, and developed within our established research framework." Sarah felt the atmosphere in the room shift as Marcus's meaning became clear. He was using her moment of recognition to assert company ownership of her work, speaking to an audience that included potential investors and business partners who had been invited to the celebration. "In fact," Marcus continued, his smile widening, as he sensed his audience's attention, "I'm excited to announce that this algorithm will be the cornerstone of a major new product initiative that will position Sterling Industries as the leader in predictive analytics." The applause was more scattered now, as people began to sense the undercurrents they didn't fully understand. Sarah stood frozen at the microphone, the crystal award heavy in her hands, as Marcus continued his impromptu presentation. Of course, as with all company innovations, proper intellectual property protocols must be followed, Marcus said, producing a folder from his jacket. Sarah, I believe we discussed the documentation that needs to be completed to formalize the company's ownership of this breakthrough. The conference center fell silent. 300 employees, executives, and guests watched as Marcus handed Sarah the patent transfer documents in front of everyone, turning her moment of recognition into a public ultimatum. Sarah stared at the papers, her mind racing through the implications of the moment. Sign the documents, and she would publicly surrender her life's work in front of her entire professional community. Refuse, and she would be seen as defying her superiors in the most visible way possible. The silence stretched uncomfortably as everyone waited for her response. Sarah could feel the weight of hundreds of eyes, the anticipation of colleagues who didn't understand what they were witnessing, the calculation of executives who understood perfectly. She thought about her father's story, about principles that mattered more than comfort or convenience. She thought about her mother's words about standing up for herself. She thought about the algorithm itself, elegant and revolutionary, born from her intellect and deserving of protection. No, Sarah said, her voice carrying clearly through the sound system. The single word fell into the silence like a stone into still water, sending ripples of shock through the assembled crowd. Marcus's smile faltered as he processed what he'd heard. I'm sorry, he said, leaning closer to the microphone. No, Sarah repeated, more forcefully. I won't sign these documents. The algorithm you're describing was developed independently, on my own time, using my personal equipment. It belongs to me, not to Sterling Industries. The conference center erupted in murmurs of confusion and surprise. Colleagues exchanged glances, trying to understand what they were witnessing. David Sterling moved closer to the stage, his expression unreadable. Marcus's mask of professionalism finally slipped completely. Sarah, you're making a serious mistake, he said, his voice tight with barely controlled anger. This algorithm was developed using company resources, under company direction, as part of your employment duties. It belongs to Sterling Industries, and your refusal to acknowledge that fact is both insubordinate and legally problematic. That's not true, Sarah replied, surprised by the steadiness of her own voice. You actively discourage this research. You told me to focus on practical improvements rather than theoretical advances. I developed this algorithm in spite of your direction, not because of it. The crowd was riveted now, watching a corporate drama unfold that was unlike anything they'd witnessed at a company celebration. Some employees pulled out phones to record the confrontation, while others looked around nervously, as if seeking escape from the uncomfortable situation. Marcus's face flushed red, as he realized he was losing control of the narrative. After everything this company has done for you, he said, his voice rising. After the opportunities we've provided, the resources we've invested, the trust we've placed in you, this is how you repay that investment? By claiming ownership of work that clearly belongs to the organization that made it possible? I repay it by doing excellent work and contributing to the company's success, Sarah replied. But I won't repay it by surrendering my intellectual property rights. Ungrateful, Marcus spat, his professional composure completely abandoned. That's what you are, ungrateful. The word hung in the air like an accusation, loaded with implications about loyalty, duty, and corporate hierarchy. The assembled crowd shifted uncomfortably as they witnessed their VP of engineering publicly attack an award-winning employee. What happened next shocked everyone, including Sarah. Marcus grabbed the crystal award from her hands and, in a moment of explosive rage, hurled it at her feet. The elegant piece shattered against the marble floor with a sound like breaking glass, sending fragments scattering across the stage. The conference center fell into absolute silence. 300 people stared in stunned disbelief as Sarah stood surrounded by the glittering remains of her Employee of the Year award, her professional recognition literally shattered by her supervisor's tantrum. David Sterling stepped forward, his face pale with shock. Marcus, that's... Enough, Marcus interrupted, his voice carrying across the silent room. Sarah Mitchell has demonstrated that her loyalty lies with herself rather than with the organization that has supported her career. I think everyone here can see exactly what kind of employee and what kind of person we're dealing with. Sarah looked out at the sea of faces staring at her. Colleagues she'd worked beside for years, executives she'd respected, industry professionals she'd hoped to impress. Some looked sympathetic, others appeared uncomfortable, and a few seemed to be calculating the political implications of what they'd witnessed. But as she stood there, surrounded by the wreckage of her award and the wreckage of her professional relationships, Sarah felt something unexpected. Relief. The pretense was over. The corporate politeness that had masked the fundamental conflict was stripped away. Everyone now knew exactly what was at stake and where she stood. "You're right about one thing," Sarah said, her voice carrying clearly through the sound system. "My loyalty is to the truth. My algorithm was developed independently, and I have documentation to prove it. If Sterling Industries wants to claim ownership, they can do so in court." She stepped down from the stage, careful to avoid the broken glass, and walked toward the exit. The crowd parted before her, creating a path through the silent conference center. Jake fell into step beside her, his presence a steady anchor in the surreal moment. As they reached the exit, Sarah turned back to address the room one final time. "Innovation requires courage," she said. "The courage to pursue ideas that others dismiss, to challenge conventional thinking, and to stand up for what's right even when it's difficult. I hope all of you remember that." The conference center doors closed behind them, cutting off the murmur of voices that had begun to rise as the crowd processed what they'd witnessed. In the hallway outside, Sarah finally allowed herself to feel the full impact of what had just occurred. "That was either the bravest thing I've ever seen," Jake said quietly, "or the most professionally suicidal." "Maybe both," Sarah replied, surprised to find herself almost smiling. But it felt right. As they walked toward the parking garage, Sarah realized that the woman who had entered the holiday party was gone forever. The naive employee who had hoped for fairness and reasonableness from corporate leadership had been replaced by someone who understood that some battles were worth fighting regardless of the cost. The algorithm was still hers, the documentation was still solid, and the truth was still on her side. Marcus had revealed his true character in front of hundreds of witnesses, and David Sterling had seen exactly what kind of person he'd been supporting. The real war was just beginning. But the opening battle belonged to Sarah Mitchell, and for the first time in weeks, that felt like enough. The aftermath of the holiday party debacle moved with the lightning speed characteristic of Silicon Valley scandals. By Tuesday morning, videos of Marcus's meltdown had circulated through tech industry social media, transforming Sarah from an unknown data scientist into the center of a viral controversy about corporate ethics and intellectual property rights. Jake's law office became Sarah's second home, as they prepared for the legal storm they knew was coming. The space was deliberately modest, a converted Victorian house in Palo Alto with mismatched furniture and walls lined with patent law reference books. But what it lacked in corporate polish, it made up for in focused intensity, as Jake and his small team worked 18-hour days building Sarah's case. Sterling Industries filed their response this morning, Jake announced, spreading the thick, legal document across his desk. 37 pages of aggressive litigation designed to intimidate us into submission. Sarah read through the company's formal complaint with growing disbelief. They weren't just claiming ownership of her algorithm, they were alleging theft of trade secrets, breach of fiduciary duty, and tortious interference with business relationships. The damages they sought totaled $12 million, a figure calculated to destroy her financially, even if she won on the underlying intellectual property claims. "This is personal," Sarah said, noting the vindictive tone of the legal language. "Marcus isn't just trying to take my algorithm. He's trying to make sure I can never work in technology again." "Scorched earth litigation," Jake confirmed grimly. "But there's a silver lining. They're claiming damages based on the algorithm's commercial value, which validates our argument about its worth. They can't simultaneously argue that it's worthless, employee work, and seek millions in damages." Elena Rodriguez had become an unlikely but crucial ally in their preparation. Her insider knowledge of Sterling Industries' operations, combined with her access to internal documentation, provided insights that would have been impossible to obtain through formal discovery procedures. Marcus has been increasingly reckless since the holiday party, Aiyana reported during a clandestine meeting at a coffee shop 20 miles from the office. He's pressuring IT to search your computer files, demanding access to personal documents, and asking HR to investigate your email communications. Is that legal? Sarah asked. Questionable at best, and potentially criminal depending on what they access, Jake replied. Corporate computer use policies give companies broad rights, but they can't authorize phishing expeditions for personal information unrelated to work duties. Aiyana pulled out a manila envelope containing printed emails. These are communications between Marcus and the company's outside legal counsel. They were CC'd to me as HR director, so I had legitimate access. The emails revealed a litigation strategy designed to break Sarah financially and professionally. Sterling Industries planned to drag out the proceedings for years, filing motion after motion to increase her legal costs while simultaneously pressuring her colleagues to testify against her. Look at this, Aiyana pointed to a specific email. Marcus is offering Rebecca Chen a promotion to senior researcher in exchange for testifying that Sarah used company resources for her algorithm development. Sarah felt a familiar pang of disappointment about Rebecca's betrayal, but also a growing understanding of the systemic pressures that had shaped her former friend's choices. The tech industry's competitive culture created environments where loyalty was a luxury few could afford when their careers were at stake. We need to move faster than they expect, Jake said, reviewing their timeline. Traditional intellectual property litigation can take 3 to 5 years, but we can't survive that kind of extended battle. We need to force a resolution within 12 to 18 months. Their strategy centered on proving not just Sarah's independent development of the algorithm, but Marcus's pattern of intellectual property theft across multiple companies. Dr. Jennifer Walsh had agreed to testify about her similar experience, providing crucial pattern evidence that transformed the case from a simple employment dispute into a broader examination of corporate misconduct. Wednesday brought their first major court appearance, a hearing on Sterling Industries' motion for a temporary restraining order that would prevent Sarah from discussing her algorithm publicly or seeking alternative employment in the field. The courtroom was packed with tech industry journalists, employment lawyers, and curious observers drawn by the viral video of Marcus's holiday party meltdown. Judge Patricia Chen, no relation to Rebecca, presided with the no-nonsense efficiency of someone who had seen every variety of Silicon Valley legal drama. She listened patiently as Sterling Industries' attorney, a sharp-dressed partner from Harrison, Webb & Associates, argued that Sarah posed an immediate threat to the company's trade secrets and competitive position. Your Honor, the company's lawyer intoned with practiced gravitas. Ms. Mitchell is attempting to steal proprietary algorithms developed using company resources, under company supervision, as part of her employment duties. Allowing her to continue publicizing these trade secrets would cause irreparable harm to our client's business interests. Jake's response was equally measured, but carried the moral authority of someone defending fundamental rights rather than corporate profits. Your Honor, this case represents exactly the kind of overreach that California's employment laws were designed to prevent. Ms. Mitchell developed her algorithm independently, and she has extensive documentation proving that, fact, Sterling Industries is attempting to use the legal system to claim ownership of work they neither funded nor directed. The judge asked pointed questions about the timeline of development, the nature of Sarah's employment duties, and the evidence supporting each side's claims. Sarah found herself testifying about her weekend hiking trips, her personal laptop usage, and her supervisor's explicit discouragement of AI research. Mr. Blackwell told me repeatedly that artificial intelligence was outside our departmental focus, Sarah testified. He specifically directed me to concentrate on practical improvements to existing systems rather than pursuing theoretical research that might never have commercial applications. Judge Chen's questions revealed a sophisticated understanding of both intellectual property law and Silicon Valley business practices. She'd clearly presided over similar cases and recognized the patterns of corporate overreach that characterized many employment disputes in the tech industry. The court finds that plaintiff has failed to demonstrate likelihood of success on the underlying intellectual property claims, Judge Chen ruled after a brief recess. The evidence suggests that Ms. Mitchell's algorithm was developed independently, outside the scope of her employment duties, using personal resources. The requested restraining order is denied. The courtroom erupted in murmurs of surprise and satisfaction from Sarah's supporters. Tech journalists immediately began typing on their phones, understanding that the ruling represented a significant early victory for employee rights in intellectual property disputes. But Sterling Industries' legal team wasn't finished. Within hours of the hearing, they filed an emergency appeal and simultaneously launched a media campaign designed to portray Sarah as a disgruntled employee attempting to steal valuable corporate assets. Mitchell's claims are baseless and opportunistic, Marcus told TechCrunch in a carefully staged interview. She's attempting to profit from work that clearly belongs to Sterling Industries, work that was made possible by the resources and support our company provided throughout her employment. The media battle became as important as the legal proceedings. Sarah found herself thrust into a public spotlight she'd never sought, forced to defend not just her intellectual property rights, but her character and professional integrity. Jake arranged interviews with sympathetic journalists while carefully avoiding statements that might compromise their legal strategy. "This case is bigger than just my algorithm," Sarah told a reporter from the San Francisco Chronicle. "It's about whether innovation belongs to the people who create it or to the corporations that employ them. Every engineer, every researcher, every creative professional has a stake in this outcome." The story resonated beyond Silicon Valley's insular community. Academic researchers, independent inventors, and freelance professionals across the country saw parallels to their own struggles with institutional attempts to claim ownership of individual creativity. Dr. Jennifer Walsh's willingness to speak publicly about her experience with Marcus added crucial credibility to Sarah's case. "This isn't an isolated incident," Walsh told Wired magazine. "Marcus Blackwell has built his entire career on claiming credit for other people's innovations. Sarah Mitchell is fighting not just for her own rights, but for every brilliant woman who's ever had her work stolen by mediocre men in positions of power." As the first week of formal litigation concluded, Sarah reflected on how completely her life had changed. The quiet researcher who had worked anonymously in her cramped office was now a public figure representing fundamental questions about innovation, ownership, and corporate power. The algorithm that had started as a personal passion project had become the center of a legal and cultural battle that would determine not just her future, but potentially the future of intellectual property rights in the technology industry. Friday evening found Sarah and Jake in his office, surrounded by legal documents, media clippings, and the exhausted satisfaction of survivors who had made it through their first major engagement. The real battle was just beginning, but they had established crucial precedents and gained public support that would sustain them through the difficult months ahead. "How are you holding up?" Jake asked as they prepared to leave for the weekend. Sarah looked out the window at the lights of Silicon Valley, the landscape that had once represented opportunity and innovation. Now it felt like a battlefield where the future of creativity itself was being contested. "I'm tired, scared, and angry," she said honestly, "but I'm also more determined than I've ever been in my life. They picked the wrong person to intimidate." The algorithm waited patiently in its secure servers, elegant mathematical proof that individual brilliance could still triumph over institutional greed. The question was whether the legal system would recognize that truth or whether corporate power would once again prevail over individual rights. But for the first time since this battle began, Sarah Mitchell felt like she might actually win. The algorithm. Wars. 3 months into the legal battle, the war of attrition that Sterling Industries had planned was beginning to backfire spectacularly. What they'd intended as a quiet corporate dispute had evolved into a public referendum on Silicon Valley's treatment of innovation and intellectual property rights. The case had attracted attention from employment rights organizations, women in tech advocacy groups, and even congressional representatives who saw it as emblematic of broader systemic problems in the technology industry. Sarah's story had become a rallying cry for creative professionals across multiple fields, but the personal cost was mounting. Her savings were depleted despite Jake's pro bono representation. Her stress levels had triggered health issues she'd never experienced, and the constant media attention had transformed her private life into a public performance. Yet something unexpected had emerged from the crucible of litigation, a strength she'd never known she possessed, and a clarity about what truly mattered that made every sacrifice worthwhile. The breakthrough came on a foggy Tuesday morning when Rebecca Chen appeared at Jake's office without warning, her usual composure replaced by obvious distress. Elena Rodriguez had called ahead to warn them she was coming, but nothing could have prepared Sarah for the emotional complexity of facing her former friend under these circumstances. "I need to tell you something," Rebecca said without preamble, her voice barely above a whisper. "About Marcus, about the case, about what's really been happening at Sterling Industries." She looked exhausted, as if she hadn't slept in weeks. Dark circles under her eyes and trembling hands revealed the toll that months of conflicted loyalty had exacted. Sarah studied her former friend's face, seeing not the calculating opportunist she'd imagined, but someone who had been struggling with impossible choices in an impossible situation. "Marcus has been pressuring me to lie under oath," Rebecca continued, her words coming in a rush. "He wants me to testify that you used company servers for algorithm development, that you discussed proprietary methodologies during team meetings, that your work was clearly derivative of existing company projects." Jake leaned forward, his legal instincts activated, all of which would be perjury. "I know." Rebecca's voice cracked. "But he's threatened my job, my visa status, my entire future in this country. He's made it clear that if I don't support the company's version of events, I'll be blacklisted from the tech industry." Sarah felt a complex mixture of emotions: anger at the months of betrayal, sympathy for Rebecca's impossible position, and hope that the truth might finally emerge from the web of corporate manipulation that had obscured it. "What changed your mind?" Sarah asked quietly. Rebecca pulled out her phone and showed them a recording app. "Yesterday's conversation with Marcus. I've been documenting our meetings for the past month because I knew this moment would come." She pressed play, and Marcus Blackwell's voice filled the office with chilling clarity. "Rebecca, I need you to understand that this isn't about truth or falsehood. It's about loyalty to the organization that has invested in your career. Sarah Mitchell is attempting to steal millions of dollars in company assets, and anyone who helps her is complicit in that theft. Your testimony needs to support the company's interests, regardless of your personal opinions about what happened." The recording continued for 15 minutes, documenting Marcus's systematic attempt to suborn perjury while carefully avoiding explicitly instructing Rebecca to lie. It was a masterclass in corporate intimidation, revealing the sophisticated pressure tactics that Sterling Industries had deployed against multiple witnesses. "There's more," Rebecca said, producing a flash drive. "Email threads between Marcus and David Sterling, communications with the outside legal team, internal memos about the litigation strategy. I copied everything I could access." Jake reviewed the files with growing amazement. The documents revealed a conspiracy that extended far beyond simple intellectual property theft. Sterling Industries had planned from the beginning to claim Sarah's algorithm, while simultaneously destroying her professional reputation to prevent her from challenging their ownership. "Look at this," Jake said, pointing to an email from David Sterling to the board of directors. They knew Sarah had a legitimate claim to independent development, but they decided to proceed anyway, because they calculated she wouldn't have the resources to fight a prolonged legal battle. The most damaging document was a strategy memo outlining plans to neutralize Mitchell's credibility through systematic character assassination. The company had hired private investigators to search for personal scandals, contacted her former employers seeking negative information, and even considered planting false evidence of professional misconduct. "This isn't just intellectual property theft," Jake said grimly. "This is conspiracy to commit fraud, witness intimidation, and potentially criminal defamation. Rebecca, are you willing to testify about all of this?" Rebecca nodded, tears streaming down her face. "I've been complicit in something terrible. I let my fear override my conscience, and I've watched a brilliant woman be systematically destroyed by people who should have been celebrating her achievements." "What finally made you come forward?" Sarah asked. "My parents," Rebecca replied simply. "I called them last weekend and told them what was happening. My mother said something that cut right through all my rationalizations. She said, 'We didn't sacrifice everything to bring you to America, so you could become the kind of person who helps powerful men steal from brilliant women.'" The impact of Rebecca's defection reverberated through Sterling Industries within hours. Word spread quickly through the tech industry's interconnected networks that a key witness had switched sides, bringing with her documentation that could fundamentally alter the case's trajectory. Marcus's response was predictably explosive. He called an emergency department meeting where he denounced Rebecca as a disloyal opportunist who had been corrupted by outside influences. but his increasingly erratic behavior was beginning to alienate even his supporters within the company. Dr. Jennifer Walsh's testimony provided crucial historical context for understanding Marcus's methods. Under Jake's careful questioning, she described a pattern of behavior that spanned multiple companies and numerous victims. Marcus Blackwell operates like a corporate parasite, Walsh testified. He identifies brilliant subordinates working on breakthrough projects, then systematically claims ownership through manipulation, intimidation, and fraud. He's destroyed careers across the tech industry, and Sarah Mitchell represents his most ambitious theft yet. Walsh's credibility was unassailable, a respected researcher with patents worth millions and no personal stake in Sarah's case beyond a commitment to justice. Her willingness to testify had opened the floodgates for other former colleagues to come forward with their own stories of Marcus's exploitation. 3 additional witnesses emerged over the following weeks, each describing similar experiences, with Marcus's appropriation of their work. The pattern was so consistent that it suggested systematic criminal behavior rather than isolated incidents of corporate overreach. Media coverage intensified as the scope of the scandal became clear. TechCrunch published a comprehensive investigation titled The Innovation Thief: How Marcus Blackwell Built His Career on Stolen Ideas. The article detailed a 15-year pattern of intellectual property theft that had generated millions in corporate profits while destroying the careers of numerous talented researchers. Sarah found herself at the center of a story much larger than her individual case. Employment lawyers across the country began citing her litigation as precedent for challenging overly broad intellectual property clauses. Academic researchers started organizing to push for stronger protections for independent innovation. Even venture capital firms began including intellectual property audit provisions in their due diligence procedures. The public pressure created internal tension at Sterling Industries that David Sterling could no longer ignore. Board members who had initially supported aggressive litigation began questioning whether the company's reputation could survive continued association with Marcus's methods. The stock price has dropped 12% since this story broke, Aiyana reported during one of their regular strategy sessions. Major clients are expressing concerns about doing business with a company that steals from its own employees. The board is meeting weekly to discuss damage control. But Marcus refused to surrender without exhausting every possible avenue of attack. As his position weakened, his tactics became increasingly desperate and personal. Private investigators began following Sarah's daily activities, looking for evidence of misconduct or vulnerability. Anonymous rumors circulated suggesting she had mental health issues, or had fabricated her claims for financial gain. "He's becoming dangerous," Jake warned after discovering that Marcus had attempted to access Sarah's medical records through fraudulent requests. People with everything to lose sometimes make very poor decisions. The breakthrough that would ultimately decide the case came from an unexpected source: Sterling Industries' own IT department. A whistleblower contacted Jake with evidence that Marcus had ordered the systematic deletion of files that would support Sarah's independent development claims. "We have server logs showing exactly when files were deleted and who ordered the deletions," the IT specialist explained during a clandestine meeting. Marcus personally oversaw the destruction of evidence, thinking it would eliminate proof of Sarah's independent work. But the IT department's backup procedures had preserved copies of the deleted files, creating an irrefutable record of evidence destruction that elevated the case from civil litigation to potential criminal charges. The media firestorm that followed was unprecedented in Silicon Valley's history. Videos of Marcus leaving the Sterling Industries building surrounded by reporters played on every major news network. Editorial boards across the country condemned corporate intellectual property theft as a threat to American innovation. Congressional hearings were announced to investigate the broader implications of the case. Sarah watched the coverage from Jake's office, feeling a surreal sense of displacement as her personal struggle became a national conversation about fundamental questions of creativity, ownership, and justice. "How does it feel to be the face of a movement?" Jake asked, as they watched a CNN panel discuss the implications of her case for employment law. "Overwhelming," Sarah replied honestly. "I just wanted to protect my algorithm. I never imagined it would become about changing an entire system." "The best revolutions start with individuals who refuse to accept injustice," Jake said. "You didn't set out to change Silicon Valley. but your courage has inspired thousands of other people to speak up about their own experiences. That evening, Sarah's phone rang with a call that would mark the beginning of the end. David Sterling himself was on the line, his voice carrying the weary tone of someone who had finally recognized the inevitable. "Ms. Mitchell, I think it's time we discussed a resolution to this unfortunate situation." The boardroom at Sterling Industries felt different when Sarah entered it as an equal rather than a subordinate. Floor-to-ceiling windows offered panoramic views of Silicon Valley, but the atmosphere inside was heavy with the weight of impending corporate reckoning. David Sterling sat at the head of the polished conference table, flanked by lawyers whose expensive suits couldn't hide their obvious discomfort with the situation they faced. Marcus Blackwell was notably absent, a detail that spoke volumes about how dramatically the power dynamics had shifted. Jake had informed Sarah that morning that Marcus had been placed on administrative leave pending the outcome of both the civil litigation and a criminal investigation that had been launched, based on the evidence of systematic fraud and evidence destruction. "Ms. Mitchell," Sterling began, his voice carrying none of the casual authority she remembered from their previous encounters. "I want to begin by acknowledging that serious mistakes were made in how this situation was handled. Our investigation has revealed patterns of behavior that fall far below the ethical standards we expect from our leadership team." It was a carefully worded corporate apology, designed to accept responsibility without admitting legal liability. Sarah recognized the language for what it was: the opening gambit in settlement negotiations that would determine not just her future but potentially the future of intellectual property rights in the technology industry. "The question now," Sterling continued, "is how we move forward in a way that serves everyone's interests, while allowing Sterling Industries to continue its mission of driving technological innovation." Jake responded with equal formality. "Our client appreciates the company's acknowledgement of the misconduct that has occurred. However, any resolution must begin with full recognition of Ms. Mitchell's ownership rights to her algorithm and appropriate compensation for the damages she has suffered." The negotiations that followed were complex and emotionally charged, involving not just financial terms but questions of public accountability and corporate reform that had implications far beyond Sarah's individual case. Sterling Industries wanted a quiet settlement that would make the scandal disappear, while Sarah's legal team insisted on transparency that would prevent similar abuses in the future. "We're prepared to offer full recognition of your intellectual property rights," Sterling's lead attorney announced, sliding a document across the table, "plus compensatory damages of $2 million for the distress and professional harm you've experienced." Sarah reviewed the settlement offer with Jake, noting the multiple non-disclosure clauses that would prevent her from discussing the case publicly. The financial terms were generous, more money than she'd ever imagined possessing, but the secrecy requirements felt like a betrayal of the hundreds of other victims whose stories had inspired her fight. "The non-disclosure agreement is unacceptable," Jake replied firmly. "This case has become a matter of public interest that extends far beyond individual compensation. Ms. Mitchell has a responsibility to the broader community of researchers and innovators who face similar challenges." Aiyana Rodriguez provided crucial insight into Sterling Industries' internal situation during a break in the negotiations. The company was facing multiple federal investigations, class action lawsuits from other employees who had been similarly exploited, and a stockholder revolt that threatened the executive leadership team's survival. "The board is terrified," Aiyana explained. "They're realizing that Marcus's behavior has created massive liability exposure across multiple jurisdictions. 3 other companies where he previously worked are now conducting their own internal investigations." "What about David Sterling's position?" "Precarious. The board is questioning how he could have been unaware of Marcus's pattern of misconduct. There are serious discussions about bringing in new leadership to restore the company's reputation." The revelation that Sterling Industries was facing existential threats rather than mere embarrassment fundamentally altered the negotiation dynamics. Sarah and Jake realized they held far more leverage than they'd initially understood. The company needed resolution more desperately than they needed settlement. "We have a counterproposal," Jake announced when negotiations resumed. "Full recognition of intellectual property rights, $5 million in compensatory damages, and establishment of an independent ethics review board to prevent similar abuses. No non-disclosure agreement, and a public statement acknowledging the company's responsibility for the misconduct that occurred." Sterling's legal team requested a recess to confer with their client. Through the conference room's glass walls, Sarah could see heated discussions taking place as lawyers huddled around phones, presumably consulting with board members and crisis management specialists. Rebecca Chen's testimony had provided the breakthrough evidence that made settlement inevitable, but her personal journey toward truth-telling represented something more significant than legal strategy. During a private conversation before the negotiations, she had apologized with a sincerity that transcended mere regret. "I've been thinking about why I made the choices I did," Rebecca had said, "and I realized that I confused success with survival, ambition with integrity. Watching you fight for your principles made me understand what I'd sacrificed to get where I am." "What will you do now?" Sarah had asked. "I'm leaving Sterling Industries regardless of how this settles," Rebecca replied. "I want to work somewhere that values innovation over politics, where brilliant ideas are celebrated rather than stolen. Maybe we could work together someday, if you can forgive me." The possibility of redemption through truth-telling had become a recurring theme as more victims of Marcus's exploitation came forward. Dr. Jennifer Walsh had started a support network for researchers who had experienced intellectual property theft, creating a community where survivors could share resources and strategies for fighting back. "Your case has given people permission to speak up," Walsh had told Sarah during a recent phone call. "For years, we accepted these abuses because we thought we were powerless to challenge them. You've shown that individual courage can still triumph over institutional corruption." When negotiations resumed, Sterling's demeanor had changed noticeably. The confident corporate executive had been replaced by someone who understood that his company's survival depended on reaching acceptable terms. "We're prepared to accept your counterproposal with one modification," he announced. "The public statement will acknowledge systemic failures in our oversight procedures rather than admitting specific legal wrongdoing." It was a face-saving compromise that preserved the essential elements of accountability while allowing Sterling Industries to avoid explicit admission of criminal liability. Jake conferred quietly with Sarah before responding. "That's acceptable, with the understanding that the Ethics Review Board will have full access to historical personnel files and the authority to recommend changes to company policies." Agreed. The formal settlement documents were prepared over the following week, but the real resolution had already occurred in that moment of mutual recognition that justice sometimes required compromise from both sides. Sarah would receive not just financial compensation, but public vindication of her intellectual property rights and assurance that similar abuses would be more difficult in the future. Marcus Blackwell's final chapter unfolded with the inexorable momentum of corporate justice. Criminal charges were filed for evidence destruction, fraud, and conspiracy to commit theft of intellectual property. His industry connections, which had once seemed impregnable, evaporated as former allies distanced themselves from the scandal. "He's finished in Silicon Valley," Elena reported with grim satisfaction. "No reputable company will hire him, and the criminal charges will likely result in prison time. His entire career was built on stolen work, and now everyone knows it." The broader implications of Sarah's victory rippled through the technology industry with unprecedented speed. Employment contracts across Silicon Valley were revised to include stronger protections for independent innovation. Universities began offering courses on intellectual property rights specifically designed for researchers and engineers. Venture capital firms started requiring intellectual property audits before investing in new companies. Sarah's mother flew out from Ohio for the settlement signing, her presence providing emotional anchor during a week that felt more like a surreal dream than reality. Linda Mitchell had watched her daughter's transformation from quiet researcher to public advocate with a mixture of pride and concern. "Your father would be so proud," Linda said as they walked through the hotel lobby after the final settlement meeting. "Not just because you won, but because you won the right way, with integrity and courage." "I'm not sure I feel like I won," Sarah replied honestly. "So much damage was done. So many people were hurt. I keep thinking about all the brilliant researchers who suffered in silence because they didn't have the resources to fight back." "That's exactly why this matters," Linda said firmly. "You've made it easier for the next person to speak up, and the person after that. Sometimes the most important victories are the ones that make future battles unnecessary." The settlement ceremony itself was remarkably anticlimactic for an event that had captured national attention. Documents were signed in a conference room that could have been anywhere, with handshakes that carried the weight of systemic change, but felt no different from ordinary business transactions. David Sterling's public statement was broadcast on every major news network. Sterling Industries acknowledges that serious failures in our oversight procedures allowed the systematic violation of employee intellectual property rights. We accept full responsibility for these failures and commit to implementing comprehensive reforms to ensure they never occur again. As Sarah left the Sterling Industries building for the final time, she reflected on the journey that had transformed her from anonymous researcher to reluctant revolutionary. The algorithm that had started the entire conflict remained hers, now legally protected and financially valuable beyond her original imagination. But the true victory lay in the broader changes her fight had catalyzed. Intellectual property theft would be more difficult in the future. Corporate accountability had been strengthened, and brilliant researchers would have more tools to protect their innovations from exploitation. Jake walked beside her toward the parking garage, both of them carrying the exhausted satisfaction of warriors who had survived a brutal campaign. The legal battle was over, but Sarah knew that her real work was just beginning. The platform she had gained through her struggle would allow her to advocate for others facing similar challenges, to push for systemic reforms that could prevent future abuses. "What's next?" Jake asked as they reached her car. Sarah looked back at the Sterling Industries building one final time, its glass and steel facade reflecting the California sunlight with deceptive beauty. Inside, hundreds of brilliant researchers continued their work, hopefully now with stronger protections for their intellectual contributions. "Now I build something better," she said with quiet determination. "A company where innovation is celebrated, rather than stolen, where brilliant ideas belong to the people who create them." The algorithm waited patiently in its secure servers. Elegant mathematical proof that individual creativity could still triumph over institutional greed. Soon, it would serve as the foundation for something unprecedented in Silicon Valley, a technology company built on principles of justice, integrity, and respect for the minds that drive innovation forward. The war was over, but the revolution was just beginning. The Algorithm Wars. 6 months after the settlement, Sarah stood in the converted warehouse that would serve as headquarters for Mitchell Analytics, her new company built on the foundation of the algorithm that had nearly cost her everything. The space buzzed with purposeful energy as a carefully selected team of researchers, engineers, and ethicists worked to create something unprecedented in Silicon Valley, a technology company where innovation belonged to the people who created it. The morning sun streamed through industrial windows, illuminating workstations where brilliant minds pursued breakthrough research without fear of exploitation. Sarah had insisted on an open floor plan that encouraged collaboration while maintaining individual ownership of ideas, a physical manifestation of the principles she'd fought to establish. "The healthcare predictive modeling project is exceeding all expectations," reported Dr. Lisa Chen, Sarah's new head of research and Rebecca's younger sister. The hiring had been symbolic as much as practical, a demonstration that redemption was possible for those willing to embrace change. "Our algorithm is identifying patient risk factors with 98.7% accuracy, potentially saving thousands of lives through early intervention." Sarah reviewed the quarterly reports with satisfaction that went beyond mere financial success. Mitchell Analytics had become profitable within 4 months, faster than any technology startup in recent memory. But more importantly, they had proven that ethical business practices could coexist with commercial viability. The company's unique intellectual property model attracted top talent from across the industry. Researchers retained ownership of their independent innovations while sharing in the commercial success of collaborative projects. It was a radical departure from Silicon Valley's standard exploitation model, and its success was forcing other companies to reconsider their own policies. "We've received another acquisition offer," Jake reported, his role having evolved from legal counsel to business partner and increasingly romantic partner. "This one from Google, for $200 million. Sarah didn't hesitate. "Same answer as the others. We're not for sale." The offers had been coming regularly as established companies recognized both the commercial value of Sarah's algorithm and the cultural shift it represented. But selling would betray everything she'd fought to achieve: the independence, the ethical framework, the proof that innovation could thrive without corporate overlords claiming ownership of others' genius. Aiyana Rodriguez had joined Mitchell Analytics as Chief Ethics Officer, a newly created position that reflected the company's commitment to preventing the abuses that had characterized Sarah's experience at Sterling Industries. Her background in both HR and employment law made her uniquely qualified to design systems that protected both individual rights and collaborative innovation. "The Industry Ethics Conference wants you as the keynote speaker," Aiyana announced, referring to a major Silicon Valley event that had become a forum for discussing the reforms Sarah's case had inspired. They're calling it the Mitchell Doctrine, the principle that intellectual property belongs to the people who create it, not the companies that employ them. The phrase made Sarah uncomfortable in its grandiosity, but she recognized its symbolic importance. Her individual struggle had become a catalyst for systemic change that extended far beyond her personal circumstances. Rebecca Chen's journey toward redemption had been neither easy nor immediate. After leaving Sterling Industries, she had endured months of professional exile as her former colleagues struggled to trust someone who had initially sided with corporate power over individual rights. But her testimony against Marcus had been crucial to his criminal conviction, and her genuine remorse had gradually rebuilt burned bridges. "I want to hire Rebecca for the quantum computing project," Dr. Chen reported during their weekly team meeting. "Her expertise in machine learning optimization is exactly what we need, and she's proven her commitment to ethical research practices." Sarah considered the request carefully. Rebecca's technical skills were undeniable, and her experience with corporate manipulation would be valuable in designing systems that protected against exploitation. More importantly, her willingness to sacrifice personal advancement for moral principle had demonstrated the kind of character growth that Sarah wanted to encourage. "Set up an interview," Sarah decided. "But make it clear that this company operates on principles of transparency and mutual respect. Anyone who compromises those values won't survive here regardless of their technical abilities." The broader impact of Sarah's victory continued to ripple through Silicon Valley and beyond. Congressional hearings had led to new federal protections for employee intellectual property rights. University technology transfer offices had revised their policies to ensure faculty retained greater control over their research. Even international governments were studying the Mitchell model as a framework for promoting innovation while protecting individual rights. Marcus Blackwell's criminal trial had concluded with a conviction on multiple counts of fraud, evidence, destruction, and conspiracy to commit theft of intellectual property. His 18-month prison sentence sent a clear message that corporate intellectual property theft would no longer be treated as a mere civil matter. The conviction had been covered extensively in business media, serving as a cautionary tale for other executives who might consider similar exploitation. "He's appealing, of course," Jake reported during one of their evening walks through the hills overlooking Silicon Valley. "But the evidence was overwhelming. The conviction will stand." "I don't take satisfaction in his downfall," Sarah said honestly. "I just hope it prevents other people from suffering what he put his victims through." David Sterling had survived the scandal, but barely. Sterling Industries' board had forced extensive corporate restructuring, including the establishment of an independent employee advocacy office and regular audits of intellectual property practices. The company's stock price had recovered somewhat, but its reputation remained tarnished by association with Marcus's systematic misconduct. "Sterling called again," Aiyana mentioned during a strategy meeting. "He wants to discuss potential collaboration on the healthcare project." Sarah considered the irony of her former employer seeking partnership with the company she'd built in response to their exploitation. "Schedule a meeting, but make it clear that any collaboration will be on our terms, with full transparency and proper attribution of all contributions." The anniversary of the holiday party confrontation arrived with little fanfare, but Sarah marked it privately as the moment when her life had truly begun. The woman who had accepted Marcus's abuse without question was gone, replaced by someone who understood that brilliance carried both opportunity and responsibility. Her mother's visit that weekend provided perspective on how fundamentally everything had changed. Linda Mitchell toured the Mitchell Analytics offices with obvious pride, but her greatest satisfaction came from seeing her daughter's transformation from victim to leader. "You've become the person your father always believed you could be," Linda said as they sat in Sarah's new office, overlooking the valley where so much innovation had been stolen from its creators. Not just brilliant, but brave. Sarah's personal relationship with Jake had deepened as they'd worked together to build something meaningful from the wreckage of corporate injustice. His initial role as legal protector had evolved into genuine partnership based on shared values and mutual respect for each other's independence. "I love you," he said simply one evening as they watched the sunset from her apartment balcony. "Not because you needed saving, but because you saved yourself, and then used that strength to save others." The algorithm that had started everything continued to evolve, improved by the collaborative research environment Sarah had created. Its applications had expanded from financial modeling to healthcare prediction, climate change analysis, and educational optimization. Each new use case demonstrated the exponential value of innovation when it remained under the control of people who understood its potential, rather than executives who saw only profit margins. As Sarah prepared for another day of building the future she'd envisioned, she reflected on the journey that had brought her from anonymous researcher to influential advocate. The price had been enormous: stress, financial strain, public scrutiny, and the loss of comfortable anonymity. But the rewards extended far beyond personal satisfaction to encompass systemic changes that would protect countless other innovators. The fluorescent lights that had once hummed over her cramped Sterling Industries cubicle were gone forever, replaced by natural sunlight that illuminated workstations where brilliant minds pursued breakthrough research without fear of exploitation. The algorithm that had nearly destroyed her career had become the foundation for something unprecedented. Proof that ethical business practices could not only coexist with commercial success, but could actively enhance innovation by respecting the people who created it. Standing in her office, surrounded by evidence of what principled leadership could accomplish, Sarah Mitchell understood that her real work was just beginning. The revolution she'd started would require constant vigilance to maintain, continuous effort to expand, and unwavering commitment to the values that had carried her through the darkest moments of her struggle. But for the first time in her adult life, she was exactly where she belonged, leading by example, protecting others who faced similar challenges, and proving that individual courage could still triumph over institutional corruption. The algorithm waited patiently in its servers, elegant mathematical proof that innovation belonged to the minds that conceived it, and that justice, however delayed, could ultimately prevail. The future stretched ahead with unlimited possibility, bright as the California sunshine streaming through her office windows, promising as the next breakthrough that would emerge from minds free to pursue their highest potential without fear of exploitation. Sarah Mitchell had not just won her battle, she had changed the war itself. The Algorithm Wars. Up next, you've got two more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.